Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. Amen. I spent the month of November in 2005 in the village of Mar in South Sudan. It was almost like living in the first century. I did have a satellite phone and a laptop computer and a solar charger to charge them. And in fact, the plane that we flew in on and landed on a dirt road also carried a diesel generator that they used to sort of extend their day by a couple of hours. They set it up and would run lights from about 8 o'clock when the sun set until about 10 o'clock. Mar had one well in the center of town, just like the Samaritan village. Now, technology was a little bit different. There was a pump handle to pump the water up instead of a bucket to drop down in the well and bring it up. And the buckets that the women made weren't earthenware or wood. They were plastic. My hut was a short distance from the well, so I could hear the people when they went to the well, the women's voices and the laughter of the children. And that only happened a couple of times a day, early in the morning before it got hot, and then late in the evening when the sun was on the horizon and it was cooling down. And it was those two times for the women were the big social occasions of the day. The rest of the time they were working. And nobody went to the well at noon. The only reason you do that is to avoid the other people. And of course, that's why the Samaritan woman was there at noon. It doesn't tell us why she'd had 5 husbands and was now shacked up with some guy. But the fact that she was there at noon tells us what the village's response to her was for that behavior. Small towns can be that way. So she was probably surprised to see someone there. And the story tells us that she was surprised that this Jewish man would speak to her. There's several reasons he wouldn't. One, Jews didn't talk to Samaritans, period. Rabbis didn't talk to women much other than their wives or their servants. And no rabbi in the world was going to spend time in a theological discussion with a woman. Everybody knew that women couldn't understand theology. But don't get mad at me. This is the first century, folks. That's not what I said. That's just the way it was. But he did. And she experienced God's unconditional love in Jesus' behavior towards her. And her life was transformed. Now I want you to think for a minute what it took for this woman who was afraid to come to the well when anyone else was there to go into town and tell everybody, I think I've found the Messiah. Something dramatically had changed inside of her. And it was so obvious that the people began believing right then that this must be the Messiah. So they went to see for themselves. Now, I can't imagine how much the rest of this woman's life was transformed. She was no longer that woman that had 5 husbands She was now the woman who introduced us to the Messiah. Think about the difference that made in the rest of her life. Or the difference that it made in that village, that they had been exposed to and experienced the unconditional love of God. God has transformed my life also. He didn't do it all at once, and I don't think he's through with the process. At least I hope he's not. And I'm sure that many of you have experienced those kinds of transformations in your life also. Some of you have told me about them. I've been involved in some of them. I'm going to mention two from my own life. And so that we get out of here before the Dinkas come in, I'm going to just stick to the A's. With alcohol and anger. I'm a recovering alcoholic. And until 1989, alcohol had control of me rather than the other way around. Not only did God transform my life, my relationship to alcohol, because the alcohol I have now is at the communion. He gave me the gift of being able to help other people be transformed in their relationship with alcohol. The second one is anger. You're fortunate that you didn't know me 50 years ago or 60 years ago. I was what you would call an even-tempered person. I was always angry. And my anger had a lot of control over me also. I doubt that any of you have seen me really throw a temper tantrum. I don't think other than Diana, I don't think I've known any of you that long. And if you have any doubts about whether this is really transformation or not, talk to her. She'll tell you. I still get angry, but it doesn't take over control of me now. I can use the energy in that anger to try to do something to correct the wrongs that make me angry. Now, I've got two suggestions for y'all. The first is, since God seems to do us in stages, that you ask yourself this Lent, what area of my life do I need to allow God to transform now? What is it that's interfering with my relationship with God and my neighbors that God could transform now? The second is to ask yourself, what barriers our culture is putting up to keep you from being a part of somebody else's life being transformed? With Jesus and the Samaritan woman, it was the fact that their ethnicity was different, and there were sexual taboos and some very mistaken ideas about what women could do with their minds. We've still got some of those crazy ethnic taboos today. So just ask yourself, if God is trying to use me to help somebody else's transformation in the area that He's transformed my life, what are the cultural assumptions that I'm letting interfere with that? Amen.